What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to a brand new special episode of The Lead, where it's all Houston all the time. I got a very special guest, as you see right here. It is not Michael Chiklis. It is Sean Pendergast, 6'10", host in the morning with Payne and Pendergast. Go ahead. I've already introduced yourself, but you can go ahead and tell the people a little bit more.
6 a.m. to 10 a.m., Odyssey app, SportsRadio 610. Be there, especially this time of year, because this is when we thrive. We thrive all year, but this is when we really, really thrive with the lead up to the draft. And Harley, as you know, the excitement is off the charts right now for the Houston Texans, not just in Houston, but around the NFL. It seems like Nick Caserio and D'Amico Ryans have been able to follow up Haymaker with Haymaker. When it wasn't Danielle Hunter, it was Stephon Diggs. And I think really the other moves too. I know you and I are going to talk about all this stuff, but if they hadn't gotten Danielle Hunter and hadn't traded for Stephon Diggs, I'd still be like, it's not a bad offseason. You know, like Danico Autry and Azeez Al-Shaair are two pretty good defensive players, and Joe Mixon is the best running back they've had since Arian Foster. That's a pretty good offseason, you know. And you get a little extra draft capital, whatever the case may be. But then they go out and they get Danielle Hunter and they get Stephon Diggs, and now, man, just the calculus has just changed on this team now as far as expectations goes.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun when we're talking about it. And I guess that's where I'll start with is, you know, national media had us pre-Stephon Diggs and, hell, I would say even pre-Daniel Hunter as kind of like flirting around, you know, as maybe these guys could be contenders and maybe they could be a Super Bowl pick. But now after the not only Danielle Hunter but Stephon Diggs trade, we are in legit talks now across all national media heads where the Houston Texans could be legit Super Bowl contenders. What are your thoughts on that, man? It feels a little surreal.
It's surreal. It's amazing how quickly it's happened. Like literally CJ Stroud wasn't a Houston Texan less than a year ago. You know, like it's been less than a year that he's been a Texan. And that's how rapidly all this stuff has changed. It's been barely a year that D'Amico Ryans has been the coach of the Texans. And I think, yeah, how quickly it's flipped. Winning the offseason is always a dicey thing because oftentimes teams that win the offseason don't necessarily win the regular season. I think, to me, the best thing about what Nick Caserio has done this offseason is that oftentimes when you see teams win the offseason, it's because they made a bunch of big, splashy moves that compromise something, right? If we were to have signed Christian Wilkins to the deal the Raiders signed him to, you'd be compromising future cap space big time with Christian Wilkins. If you make a trade, and we know all about this here, the Texans, when they traded for Laramie Tunsil, they compromised their next two drafts. I don't know really if the Texans have compromised anything abnormal by getting to this stage where they are. And this is really what having a quarterback like CJ Stroud on his rookie deal allows you to do. The Danielle Hunter signing was a very reasonable signing for what he is. He's one of the best pass rushers in all of football. 2-year commitment for barely $50 million. That's a responsible signing that doesn't really compromise anything. Trading Stephon Diggs, you got him for the second-round pick that you received from the Vikings for just moving back 19 spots in a draft where, let's face it, the position the Texans are going to be drafting, they're going to get a pretty similar player at 42 that they would have gotten at 23. A lot of these offensive linemen and quarterbacks and other guys the Texans were never going to be in on are going to push a lot of guys down the draft board, where in normal years you take that guy at 23. Now he might be there here, or another guy might be there at 42. So I think that's the biggest thing is, yeah, these are big splashy moves in name, and certainly they're spending resources. Like, I don't want to make it sound like Danielle Hunter, like they got him cheap or something like that. I mean, 25 million a year is nothing to sneeze at, but they've got all their draft capital for the next couple of years. They didn't Swiss cheese future drafts like they did in previous years and with previous GMs. The salary cap is in very, very good shape right now. They've still got about 20-something million in dry powder to go do some things. Maybe a Nico Collins extension coming down the pipe here pretty soon. We'll see. But I think, Harley, that's the biggest thing to me is that it's super exciting. And, yeah, they're being talked about amongst the favorites of the Super Bowl. I don't know how closely bettors or Vegas is necessarily looking at how difficult their schedule is. It's a really hard schedule that they've got just in terms of the opponents, let alone where they end up sending, where where and when they end up playing these teams. They could play some of these, they could play a game in London, they could play a Thanksgiving game, the whole 9 yards. But I think that to me is the coolest thing about this offseason is it's a splashy offseason, but they're going to be able to be just as splashy next offseason, the following offseason, because they've done it in a way that's very responsible.
We're talking so much about this offseason. Is it the best in team history?
That's a good question. It's definitely the most exciting one that I've been a part of covering at SportsRadio 610. I would say the off seasons that I've covered this team, because I've been doing radio since 2007. Admittedly, I was not in Houston for the first 5 years. I had moved away. I lived here 94 to 2001. So I wasn't here for the first 5 years of the team, but I can just go back and look and go, okay, none of those off seasons were probably that exciting because Derek Carr or David Carr was your quarterback, right? So it started, I would say the first real exciting off season that I can remember for the Texans was in 2011 when you got Jonathan Joseph, you got Daniel Manning, you had that draft, we didn't know JJ Watt was going to turn into what he turned into when they drafted him, but it was a good draft. And Wade Phillips became the defensive coordinator. People were excited about that. We haven't had that many like this. I mean, the competition's not that stiff. This is probably the most exciting one since drafting Deshaun Watson was super exciting, but that was just one move, but that was super exciting. People don't want to admit it, but by and large, people were very excited the offseason that they signed Brock Osweiler because they had a quarterback that wasn't Brian Hoyer or Fitzy or any of those guys. I mean, there was, you're 9-7 and you got a guy who played for a Super Bowl team. We don't want to admit it, but I tried to talk myself into it. I realized after like 2 press conferences, I'm like, what am I doing here? What are we doing? But easily, dude, easily, Harley, like the most exciting one. And I say that on the heels of an offseason last year where they drafted CJ Stroud and Will Anderson,
that's true.
That felt like there'll never be a more exciting moment than that offseason moment than that draft, that 10 minutes where they drafted Stroud and Will Anderson. But I think what's exciting about this offseason is we feel like a big boy team now. You know what I mean? Like last year there wasn't really much separating us from Carolina or the Colts or things other than the trade up to get Will, which I don't want to minimize, but we were just your garden variety bad football team that had high draft picks. Now you're doing things this is stuff that contenders do, and I think that's what's exciting for people is this is not drafting these 2 guys and then going into training camp hoping that you win a few games. Like this is, we drafted those guys. Now a year later, we're signing and trading for these guys. And now we hope to go win a Super Bowl. That's exciting. That's why you become a fan,
Yeah. It's crazy where we've been at, man. It's crazy. Almost a year before I remember national media taking a hot shit on the Houston Texans pre-trade of Will Anderson and post-trade of Will Anderson. Yep. And it's just crazy to see where this Texans team has come and gone from now. Yep. We're talking about the draft a lot. This is the talk around Texans Twitter. Share with the rest of the class the uniforms talk. I know you can't do, a deep dive into it, but whatever you got, there's a lot of stuff that came out. Texans dropped a 15-minute video and they gave the fans a little bit of, some context clues on what it seems like each uniform is going to be. So what you got for us? I
have not seen that video. I've got it bookmarked. I've not watched it yet. But a lot of what's I know is in that video I've been part of. They talk about the fan council on there quite a bit. Yes. I'm one of two media members that's part of the fan council. So I've been in all but one of the fan council meetings. So I've been in the meetings and the votes when it came to different things like, fonts and stuff like that. So I've seen a lot of the evolution, as much as somebody in my position is allowed to see, which is for all of us, it's the tip of the iceberg. Obviously the work that Doug Vosick, the VP of marketing, and his team have done has countless months and hours and days getting this thing going and getting this thing to fruition. The leaked uniform is obviously that's one of the 4. Yeah. This is what I'll say. This is just my opinion. I'm not giving anything up as to what part of the uniforms are. And I think it's been well publicized. There's 4 different uniforms. Yes. And the team even did the side eye on that thing last week of the league tweeting about a third helmet. The teams can have a third helmet starting in 2025, unless you're changing your uniform this year, in which case you can do the third helmet this year. And the Houston Texans Twitter account went side-eye like that. Like if you're watching on video, I'm side-eyeing right now. So I think, I mean, obviously that alludes to the fact that there's multiple helmets, at least 3. And so, well, no more than 3. Obviously, the league said you could do 3 helmets. So I'll say this, like just my opinion, is that the one that they leaked is the least favorite of mine. So I say all that to say, in my opinion, one man's opinion, the best is yet to come as far as what you're going to see. So if it's something where you looked at it, I saw a lot of the criticism was, oh, it looks like the Falcons uniform, or did they really change anything? It's still white on blue and this and that. Is that I would say the best is yet to come. I think there's one particular version of the uniform that this is going to fly off the shelves. I won't say which one, but it is going to fly off the shelves. And so I mean, I think people are going to like them. It's uniform. So everybody, the people who don't like them will probably be the most vocal. I put it this way too. I'll tell you, Harley, the alternate uniforms, which in the past have been the Color Rush and the Battle Red. Yeah. The rule is you're only allowed to wear those a combined 3 times all season and not in the postseason. Texan fans are going to want to petition for that number to go up. Let me just put it that way. For that number to go up from 3 for those 2 uniforms. So I would say best is yet to come, and a week from today we'll see them. I guess they're dropping them on social media, and then they've got the party later on where people will be able to see them live and presumably purchase jerseys and things like that. I'm guessing, and it's crazy to think too, like if this were done 2 years ago, we would be buying Brandon Cooks and Brandon Cooks jerseys and Whitney Merciless jerseys. And now I'll never forget that. Seth Payne and I were walking in 2021, the Cully year. We still weren't allowed during the preseason to go out to the pregame show. We do the pregame show out there in Bud Light Plaza. We used to. Now we're outside of Bud Light Plaza on the boulevard there. But we used to just walk down in the concourse the same level as the locker room and the cafeteria and everything else. We'd walk in the media entrance. We'd have to go like a quarter circle around and then come out the south end there at the Bud Light Plaza. So we would be walking past the locker room and the weight room and everything else. And we're back to doing that now. But in 2021, we had to go up to the first level concourse, the Section 100 concourse, and go around that way and then down to Bud Light Plaza because they still didn't want anybody walking near the players during 2021 because of COVID. So I remember Seth and I walking through the first level concourse, and one of the kiosks, this is like 8:30 in the morning, and one of the souvenir kiosks was opening up and setting up and getting ready to go. And I got to go find the picture in my phone. I remember looking at the 4 jerseys that were up in there for sale, and I'm like, this is the worst. Like, this is the most depressing jersey kiosk I've ever seen in my life. Like it was bad. And now, man, like I could come up with a dozen Texans easy that people would buy jerseys for now. You know what I mean? Sure. Like easy. And I'm not saying they're all great players. I'm just talking about their profile and being well. Like Petrie sells a bunch of jerseys because he's from Stafford and he went to Baylor and everything else. He didn't have a good year last year. I see a ton of Petrie jerseys out there because there is a star quality to Jalen to some people. You know what I mean? And so, so they're going to move a bunch of those on jersey reveal night. I wish I could reveal more. I wish I could give you some breaking news on this podcast about color schemes and things like that. But I'm legally bound not to. But I think people are gonna like them. It'll spice things up. The players all seem to like them. The players have obviously seen them, and the players seem to like them. So, and they had a lot of input on it too. If you watch that 15-minute video, I'm sure they probably showed parts of the meetings that the players had. The Texans are doing they are doing a really good job of trying to listen to fans and really, I think they learned a lot about themselves through the 2021 and 2022 era, forced them to do a lot of looking in the mirror. I don't think it's an accident that Cal and Hannah are way more forward facing now than they were before. And I'll give them credit. Like they've been out there a couple years now. This isn't one of these things where they drafted CJ Stroud, and now they're out looking for their flowers. Like, they were out there, like, you know, Cal's out there during the Cully year, and definitely during the Lovie Smith year. They were out there a lot, you know. So I think they realize some of the mistakes that were made, and that's what good owners do, is they realize the mistakes they made, and they try to do things differently, and they try to fix them. And the most important thing is they hire good people. And I think they've got that part right. I think from GM to head coach, and then the decision those two are making in terms of the players they're bringing in, man, it's hard to find an era of Texans football that's had this good of decision-making in those spots, you know, for over a period of a year or two than the one we're in right now.
The Cully year just sounds like the nuclear bomb came down and
fever dream, like, bro. Fever dream. That's what it was.
For real, man. It's like a post-apocalyptic era. The Cully year. Yeah, I survived the Cully year. Like,
dude,
man.
That would be a funny T-shirt. Except I just think people are ready, like, not remember it at all. But I survived.
Of course.
Yeah. Once they win a Super Bowl, that'll be the true test of a fan. Did you survive? Okay, yes. You're a Texan fan. Did you survive the Cully year?
Yeah.
I give my wife credit. My wife has season tickets. She's had season tickets longer than she's had me. She's had them since the very beginning. And and she's a teacher, so she doesn't make a ton of money, right? She pays for them. I don't. And so there were a lot of come to Jesus moments with those season tickets the last couple of years, but she stuck it out, man. She's glad she did.
Yeah, man. It definitely it was rough out there. It was rough out there. If anyone was a Houston sports fan,
dude,
you know, you've had some rough years with the Texans. You had some rough years with the Astros before the golden era, you know, and then, you know, the Rockets have basically been pretty consistent up until these last few years.
Dude,
we are
try real quick. I'm not to interrupt
you.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Clint Sterner and I did post-game shows for 3 seasons where they went 11-38-1.
Yeah.
We had somebody come in. I'll tell you a funny story, Harley. We had somebody. Clint and I are getting on the elevator in our building over at 24 Greenway, where Sports Radio 610 is, and we get on the elevator, and we're on the 19th floor. It's a 20-floor building. We got on the elevator going down. There's already a guy on there. There's a law firm up above us, so he's one of the lawyers. A lot of those guys up in that law firm listen to the show, listen to the station, and we ride down the elevator with the guy, and this is back when it was like. It was fair within the last year, but it was still like, it was probably like before CJ, but like after the season was over with Lovey. And the guy literally with a straight face, as we were getting off the elevator and we were going our separate ways, said, "Thank you guys for your service." I'm like, Clint, that guy just thanked us. Like we should be getting combat pay or something.
Yeah.
Like that. Yeah. Like that's how bad it was. Like we had a dude thank us for our service. Like, it was wild, and with a straight face. He was being dead serious. It was really funny.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to YouTube, I gotta turn on a camera and talk here. Here's the breaking news, guys. Years of me going through all of these coaches, and I like to, you know, put together lists of potential staffs and all this. And, you know, I was a big Robert Saleh guy at that time because I loved the 49ers aspect of them. All of that for them to, here's a curveball, Harley. Screw all that. Trash all of those tweets. We're hiring David Culley.
Mm-hmm.
and then just for the next year, for me to do the exact same thing again.
Dude.
At
least you heard of Lovie Smith. Like when I had never heard of David Culley, not once, never heard of him.
Me neither.
And I think if I remember correctly, Seth and I Googled David Culley, and he wasn't even the first David Culley that came up in Google. That's how you know you've hired an obscure coach. Like when you go to Google his name, and it's like the first thing to come up is somebody who's in a completely different profession.
That is hilarious. I'm glad we are back to being confident with the Houston Texans right now. I would like to hear, what is your confidence level heading into this year's draft with Nick Caserio?
I think it's pretty good. I think overall Nick's done a pretty good job in the draft. I mean, the Kenyon Green pick is obviously a glaring error. Just complete whiff so far on that one, where you could have had Kyle Hamilton and you draft Kenyon Green. The way I sleep at night on that one, Harley, is to think that if Kyle Hamilton were on the Texans in 2022, that he probably would have won an extra game for you, maybe 2 with a game-changing play, and you wouldn't have gotten CJ Stroud. So it was all part of the process, man. Yeah, that's how I sleep at night. But I think I'm really confident in the combination of Nick and D'Amico. You know, like I think they come from two different backgrounds, but they're very open to the ideas each other has. I think that at their core, they have a very similar vision to what good looks like in terms of the makeup of a player, you know, the love of football, just the dog mentality. But I think they work incredibly well together. I think Nick has been very, very adaptable. I think D'Amico is clearly looking for guys that kind of fit that 49er mold that you like so much. And I think Nick is happy to go shopping for those groceries. You know what I mean? Like, I think they work really, really well together. So I think when it comes to like the draft, I do think, and Nick would be the first one to tell you this too. He said it on our show before. He comes on with us, and he's going to come on with us the Monday or Tuesday after the draft, and probably like 1 or 2 weeks from today. 2 weeks from today, I guess, Monday or Tuesday, he'll be on with me and Seth. So we'll obviously follow up on everything draft wise with him on 610. But he said that before. It's like, it's a group effort, and ultimately he's the one making the picks, but it's really him and D'Amico. And I think, man, you just look at last year's draft class. That's the one I'll really go look at, because I think in 2021 he didn't really have any picks, although he did come away with Nico in that draft, you know.
Yeah.
And then in 2022. You know, thank God Stingley's working out, because that draft is very dicey right now. You know, Mechie's had the medical issues, although CJ said some things about Mechie today to make it sound like maybe Mechie is, you know, you saw the same thing I did. Yeah. The Mechie may be all the way back. I'm cautiously optimistic on that. But, you know, Petrie is a wait and see. Christian Harris has become a really good player, but Dameon Pierce is backslid, you know, so that, look, if you come away with 2 or 3 regulars from a draft, that's a good draft, you know. So 2022, I think, is still a work in progress, but it's looking like you're at least going to get Stingley and Christian Harris out of that thing long term. And maybe if Petrie can kind of get his groove back as well, maybe come away with 3 guys. That 2023 draft, though, with CJ, people are going to say, like, well, Will was the 3rd pick. Of course, he should work out. Yeah, but you traded a lot to go up and get him. That was a bold move to go up and identify Will Anderson and CJ Stroud and identify them as the culture changers that they wound up being. But if you take injuries out of it, like, man, like Juice Scruggs looks like he's on his way to being a pretty good football player. You know, if they move him to his natural position. Tank Dell, I think, has a chance to be an outstanding wide receiver. He was when he was healthy. You know, even looking at the clock, like Dylan Horton was getting in the rotation and making a play here and there before he got sick. Henry To'oTo'o. Now you start to get into the 5th round. If these guys are contributing on special teams, then you know, in the 5th, 6th, 7th round, then so be it. You know, those picks work. You found Jarrett Patterson in the 6th round. He started half the season at center for you and was pretty good. So I that's the class I look at, Harley, because that was the combination of D'Amico and Nick. You know, that was Nick and his staff identifying the classic draft talent, the draftable traits. I think with D'Amico giving his input on how he felt these guys were as far as the swarm mentality goes, you know, fitting in with the culture behind the scenes. So I'm super optimistic. I like the moves they made. I like that they're picking a couple times in the 2nd round. You know, they've got 2 second-round picks. I think is cool because the price to do that was Stephon Diggs. You know, to move back was, you know, you got Stephon Diggs out of that deal of moving back, and instead of having a 1st and a 2nd, you have 2 seconds. I'm totally cool with that. And you got a lot of capital on a lot of day 3 capital to maneuver. You know, if you see a guy, you know, if a guy starts to slip into the 3rd round, they've got plenty of picks on day 3 they can move to go get him from 86, you know, the 86th overall pick. So, yeah, man, I'm excited. I'm excited to see what they do. And I think it feels good too, you can draft these guys, you can really draft, and you don't have to feel like, okay, well, that guy has to step in. None of these guys they draft have to step in and be an impact player on the first day anymore. You know what I mean? They're past that now.
Yeah. So it feels crazy because it feels like just a year ago, before the draft of Stroud and Will Anderson, we had to have a press conference for Nick Caserio on whether or not he was on the hot seat, basically. And
now
I remember
it's just, that, dude.
It was just like, oh, okay. There's a press conference with Nick. Hi.
That was a wild press con. I know the one you're talking about. That was right after they fired Lovey. It was right after they fired Lovey, and that was a version of Nick that I had not seen. That was a version of Nick, like, well, you know, if they want me here, you know, that was wild. But as it turns out, it looks like this is the perfect marriage, man. Like Nick and DeMeco seem to get along really well. And I'll give Seth Payne credit on that. Like he was the first one I heard back when, back during the hiring cycle before DeMeco got hired. Most people were like, well, they're going to hire DeMeco and he's going to fire Nick and they're going to bring in Adam Peters from San Francisco because that's who DeMeco knows. And Seth was the first one that I thought had this opinion, and it made sense. He's like, Seth said he thought DeMeco and Nick would get along great. Like they're both very similar. They both view football very similarly. They both prioritize football very similarly, in terms of the balance of family and football. Seth thought they would work together great. And so far that's proven to be true.
Yeah, and pretty much. You're talking about a few guys in the draft. You talked about some positions. Who do you think the Texans, or at least in your opinion, who should they be looking at targeting? Do you look at BPA? I mean, there's a lot of things they can do here. You're at 42 and 59, plentiful of other picks as well that follow that. Texans got some rich talent there in round 2, and that's what DeMeco did talk about, that, they value those guys very highly. I'm sure Nick Caserio is just the same way in thinking. So what are your thoughts on what the Texans could be positioning for?
Yeah, it doesn't matter to me which pick they use on it, but I think they definitely need to come away with a young stud. It's a second-round pick, but like a young, potentially productive player for the interior of the defensive line. That's kind of a sweet spot in this draft. It looks like, from looking at all the mock drafts and the big boards, is it late first through like really through like the whole second round, depending on which guys you're looking at. That interior defensive line, that area of this draft is kind of a sweet spot for that, and it matches up with their needs. So I think whether it's 42 or 59, or maybe move up from 86 or something like that, I think they've got to come away with an interior defensive lineman. I like the Fisk kid from Florida State a lot. I don't like the Newton kid, Johnny Newton from Illinois, as much as I like Fisk from what I've seen, but I like him as well.
Interesting.
Michael Hall from Ohio State is another one who could be available at either of those picks that I like. So, and I think the nice thing for a young player, if you're coming in, similar to like a wide receiver, if they draft a wide receiver in the second round, and you're coming onto a team with CJ Stroud and all these other receivers, like your acclimation to the NFL shouldn't be as rough as if you're getting drafted into, some janky ass offense. Similarly, if you're a second round defensive tackle getting drafted, you're probably going to be part of the rotation, at least. We know DeMeco likes to play 8 guys, so you're going to be part of the rotation. You're going to be on a defensive line that has Will Anderson, Danico Autry, and Daniil Hunter playing defensive end. Like, I can't imagine being a young defensive tackle and coming into a better situation with DeMeco Ryans as your head coach, who is just, there's no better coach of guys' talent in the front 7 than DeMeco Ryans. And people seem to like Rod Wright as the new defensive line coach here. They thought he had a big impact. I think that's why he's now the regular defensive line coach. So I think interior defensive line, just for fun, I want them to come away with one of these wide receivers. Like it's one of those things, like, I don't want to let everybody else have all the fun. Give me Ladd McConkey. You know what I mean? Give me Malachi Corley or whoever, right? I mean, you're watching all the same video I am, Harley. So I think getting one of those wide receivers would be fun. I would prioritize interior defensive line. Cornerback is still a need on this team. I think right now you can never have too many of those. And I think they're going to draft a running back. I just don't know that they're going to do it on day 2. I think they'll probably do it on day 3. I'm hoping they draft the kid from New Hampshire, Dylan Lobby or whatever his name is. He's the one that Nick brought up with me and Seth on the show, jokingly, because I don't know if you saw the video from the combine when all the running backs are running to their position and Dylan did this. He did the crotch chop, the DX crotch chop. I'm showing on the video here. He did the DX crotch chop. And I sent that video to Nick, and I'm like, dude, how high up is this guy on your big board now? He sent back future Texan with laughing emojis. So that would be my pick, just because, boy, the fun we would have, us wrestling fans, with that one. But that's kind of how I'm looking at the draft. I thought it was interesting that they hosted Spencer Rattler for a visit last week from South Carolina. Yeah. I'm not totally averse to that. Not on day 2, but in day 3, like if they feel like there's a quarterback that's got all the tools, which he definitely has all the tools. Like, I don't know how good a quarterback he is, or gonna be, but man, like he's arm talent wise, there's few guys walking the earth that have the arm talent of Spencer Rattler. That would intrigue me. Like if a guy slipped to like the 4th, or they don't have a 5th round pick right now, but it's easy enough to get one. That's intriguing to me, but it's got to be one like that with a high ceiling that maybe you have him as CJ's backup. Obviously CJ's the future. I'm not saying draft a guy to replace CJ, obviously, but yeah. But you get the guy in the building, and you get him in the system, and he's in the room with CJ, and he's in the room with Bobby Slowick and Gerard Johnson and the whole 9 yards. And maybe he becomes a fungible asset for you. You know what I mean? Somebody you can trade, somebody a team might trade for. Seth Payne was on a team with Rob Johnson back in the day. Dude had one good game, and they flipped him for a 1st round pick to Buffalo. So
good Lord.
Yeah. So I'm not totally against. I'm open to anything, man. You know what I mean? Like yeah. I'm open to anything. So that's kind of how I'm looking at it. I can't wait. I don't know how you feel. Like I'm kind of excited just to sit back and watch the 1st round, and not have, hey man, we got a good team. We had a good offseason. We got picks tomorrow. I'll just sit here and I can't wait to sit and watch 4 teams draft quarterbacks in the first 5 picks, knowing full well that 3 of them aren't going to work out at all.
Sure.
Yeah, just get our popcorn out, man, and just thank God that we have CJ Stroud as our quarterback.
Yeah, man, I'm so happy to get back there, crack open a few beverages, and let's see what the mayhem resides for us. You mentioned some quarterbacks. I'll talk about it real quick. AFC South. Do you still believe the Houston Texans are going to repeat as AFC South champions? And do you see anybody that can knock us off? I'll say that.
I would say that, yes, I do. I still see the Texans winning the AFC South. I think that the schedule now, the rest of the AFC South plays largely the same schedule. It's those 3 variable games that are Dallas, Baltimore, and Kansas City. Whereas, the Jags or the Colts or, the Titans are playing, the Titans instead are playing the Commanders, the Broncos, and the Steelers, so it's those 3 games that kind of flip things. But I think the Texans are perfectly capable of winning those games now with the artillery that they have. The team that worries me the most in the division right now actually isn't Jacksonville, it's Indianapolis. Because I think they've got a pretty good roster. They've done a really good job of retaining a lot of the guys. They haven't been super active in free agency, but they've kept the core of their team together, and they were already a pretty good team last year. Ultimately, quarterback was their undoing. Ultimately the guy not being able to catch the 4th and 1 pass was their undoing. Yeah. but I think, like in that game, Jonathan Taylor ran hog wild because they just said, okay, we're just not going to let Gardner Minshew beat us. You know what I mean? So the variable of what Anthony Richardson is the scarier thing to me. Like, I think I kind of know what Trevor Lawrence is at this point. He's fine. They're going to pay him, and he's going to be one of those guys they probably need to manage around a little bit in terms of, okay, we paid this guy, but he's not a guy who necessarily raises the level of other guys around us. And it sounds crazy to say because everybody thought he was going to be a generational prospect. Trevor Lawrence doesn't scare me. The Jags don't scare me. The Colts and what Anthony Richardson might be is the biggest unknown to me right now. And the unknown always scares me more than anything else. So I would say Texans win the division, and the Colts are the team that makes me the most nervous of the other. I think the Titans are going to be abysmal. I think they're going to be awful. I think the Titans are going to be one of the bottom 4 or 5 teams in football. Yes. Calvin Ridley, that doesn't do anything for me. It's still Will Levis pulling the trigger. Janarius Sneed. I don't think the Titans know who they are. Like, you fire Mike Vrabel, and now you're doing these all-in moves with Calvin Ridley and L'Jarius Sneed. Like, I think they're schizo. I think they're all over the place. I think they're going to win like 4 games.
Wow. 4 games.
Okay. Bad.
Yeah, I'm in an AFC South chat talk. So, it's always fun to grab other people's opinions on fan bases, teams, and obviously, as you would believe, or maybe not believe, but Titans fans are very vocal. And so they're very, very vocal. So it's fun to gauge their opinion, where, to me, in my opinion, I just think Amy Strunk was upset so much with whatever happened this previous year, getting swept by the Texans, Hannah McNair calling it a sweep. It was just egging on the Tennessee Titans as much as they tried to dress up that stadium that day in the Love You Blue colors and the Oilers colors, and for them to have the egg on their face and get embarrassed by as I called it, noodle arm Case Keenum. And in the second game, you got Jerry Hughes sacking you, old man Jerry Hughes getting the sack on Will Levis. I think this is the Titans just going, you know what, we're going to do whatever we can to try to be competitive as possible, because we don't want the Texans to beat us. We don't care about the division. We just want to go 2-0 against the Texans. That's what it feels like for me.
Yeah.
So it's pretty fun to get into. You mentioned some wrestling. We'll wrap it up with some wrestling, man. I think it's one of the best WrestleMania moments of all time. And I know this is going to sound, I know people get a little upset stomach when I'm about to say this. It reminded me of that moment that is forever scarred in WrestleMania history, of the hugging and the great moment between Eddie Guerrero and Chris Benoit and what they went through. That's what that moment felt like again. And I'm hopeful and I'm glad, and I think we all kind of know Cody's character. I'm glad this image is going to last hopefully forever in WWE history. What were your thoughts, man? It was great.
It was very real. It was very predictable, but I don't mind when it's predictable, when it's something I'm looking forward to. You know what I mean? I'm looking forward to seeing how they did it. It was overbooked like crazy, and I loved it. Like it was, I loved it. My wife and I are sitting, we were watching it here in our living room right behind us here. We were watching it, and with each different guy that came running out, we're like standing up and oh my God. And when the gong went off for the Undertaker, it was, I'm getting goosebumps on my legs, like talking about it. I thought it was great. Like I had a chance to meet Cody a couple of times when he was with AEW. Because Jim Ross is a good friend of mine. So me and my buddy Wallace Marsh, who was my best man, we went to Jacksonville a couple years ago and went to an AEW taping down there, kind of right as we were coming out of COVID. It was still social distancing, seating and stuff, but we stayed with JR down there and we got to go backstage. And that was when Cody was still with the company. And he was cool, man. He spent like 10 or 15 minutes talking to us. Couldn't have been nicer, which matches up with everything I've ever heard about him. Like everything I've heard about him is he's just a really, really down-to-earth kind of guy. So I was personally rooting for him just because that was my impression of him. Like you always think about how people made you feel, and he was really, really welcoming. And Columbia was he was one of the guys running the company when we were down there with AEW. Very, very welcoming, very cool guy. I was a huge fan of Cody's dad, Dusty Rhodes. Like that's my era of wrestling. Like Dusty Rhodes was a huge star when I was in the 80s and early 90s when I was a teenager. And I was always a huge fan of Dusty Rhodes. So that part too kind of resonated with me. I just loved how real it was. I love the kind of the new production values of WWE, since I think it's Lee Fitting is the guy's name who came on board, who was an ESPN guy. And he's kind of added a layer of realism to it, but not enough to where just enough realism to it to where it's not spoiling the campy wrestling part of it as well. You know what I mean? Like he's not turning it into UFC with predetermined outcomes or anything like that. There's still a lot of showmanship. There's still a lot of goofy characters. But the presentation is such that it's so immersive now, between, man, the way they incorporate social media into the backstage area now and the things that you see. And that was the coolest part for me, Harley, was just seeing all the different things with Cody backstage, and how just the genuine appreciation that people seem to have for him backstage. I felt like the guys coming out and putting him on their shoulders was a very real moment. I think there was some wrestling scriptedness to it because it was all the baby faces that were out there doing it. So maybe that was sort of I guarantee you that footage will get used at some point in a feud that Cody has with one of those guys. You know what I mean? That LA Knight was one of the guys holding him up on his shoulder. And now these two, they can't stand each other. That footage will get used. It always does. They don't do anything for no reason at all. And The Rock's going to come back at some point, and we'll see how that all gets hashed out. I loved the whole build. I love the whole build up to this whole thing, going all the way back to when people thought Sami Zayn might end Roman's streak at Elimination Chamber 14 months ago or whatever it was. And then that didn't happen. I think people thought that might be it. And then, well, it's definitely going to be Cody now. They didn't let Sammy do it. No, Cody didn't get to do it. So now
I was like, whoa.
Cody has to run this gauntlet for a year and then get back in there in the Royal Rumble. I just thought We don't see that anymore. Well, we see it more now in wrestling, but there was that period of time, a long period of time, where everything was hot-shotted and titles changed all the time. And I like that now we're at least getting back to where the titles, holding on to the title means something. Gunther had the really long reign with the Intercontinental title. I think that's reestablished that belt as important. And then obviously Roman has a run that's, there's only been 2 or 3 that are ever longer than that. So I do like that there is a, I'll put air quotes around it, legitimacy. They're all scripted titles, but within our fantasy world that you and I live in, the legitimacy to the title. So long answer to your question, but I loved WrestleMania. I thought it was great.
Yeah, I did too. I putting it up there as one of the best WrestleManias. It's unfortunate because night 1 didn't really, it was okay. Night 1 was kind of just here's an appetizer. And then night 2 was like, here's the main course, your dessert, and here's another appetizer and everything else on top of it. Like, it was just like Las Vegas style buffet for night 2. It was awesome.
Dude. It was, in night 1, in this particular WrestleMania, I thought night 1 was always going to have a hard time getting over with people.
True.
Because inherently the main event of night 1 was going to be something that was a feeder into night 2. You know what I mean? It's, if you're a Star Wars nerd, it's like Empire Strikes Back was amazing, but the end was a cliffhanger. And now I got to wait 2 more years for Revenge, Return of the Jedi to come out. The end of night 1 was sort of it wasn't a cliffhanger, but its purpose was to set up night 2. So it was always going to be hard for that to be like super memorable, like an ending moment where our hero is standing there in the middle of the ring and everybody drives home happily. Instead, everybody drives home worried that Cody's going to get his ass kicked the next night, so that may be part of it. I'm totally with you though. On like the 2 night, like night 1 was, was good. But night 2, man, I like that they split it into 2 nights. I went to a couple of these WrestleManias that were like 6 hours long. I'll never forget. I went to the one in Arlington, like back in, I think it was 16. I think it was 16. I think I was Undertaker and Roman in Arlington. And dude, I was exhausted by the end of this sounds crazy, but sitting and watching wrestling for 6 hours and the ups and the downs that come with it, if you're emotionally invested in it, is an exhausting thing. And I think they realize, like, God, we are really screwing over the main eventers by doing this. Like, you've got a crowd that's just like, man, I just want to go home. So I'm glad they split it into 2 nights. I do like the 2 night setup.
Yeah, I do too. Well, I appreciate you coming on, Sean. We are wrapping it up right here. So again, awesome talk with you. Got into the uniforms, got into the offseason, got into the inevitable, hopeful AFC South Division champs, and hopefully a lot more. Hopefully that's what it comes down to. We're down there in legitimacy, talking ourselves into how we are going to beat the Kansas City Chiefs in the AFC Championship game. Who knows?
Yeah.
Are you going
to be at the draft party?
Yes, I will be at the draft party for sure. I don't know about the uniform reveal party. Yeah. I know that's like they give out tickets or whatnot. They said they will be, I guess, doing that once next week when it get, or at least when the date gets closer. But anything you want to promote, share with the fans, let them know where to find you.
Did you see my new prop that I bought from WWE Shop?
No, I didn't.
Hang on one second. Here
we go. Here we go.
2,000 years later.
Oh boy. We got the belt. Oh, we got a Texans belt. Okay. All righty.
So should I bring this to the draft party, you think?
Yeah, for sure.
Got to bring it to the draft party, right? Outdoor party. Picture, photo opportunities, right?
Oh, yeah. Oh, big time. Yeah. People definitely are going to want to get a picture with that.
I'm going to have this out at the pregame show this season, like out at the desk. And then my hope is I'll have it out there on game day. And then on the post game, I think after wins, just after wins, not after losses, but after wins, is Clint Sterner and I with whoever the player of the game is that they give us in the interview room. We put this baby around their waist, and Clint and I sit there and act like Paul Heyman and Jim Cornette next to him, like pointing at him and stuff. I think that'd be good social media, don't you, Harley?
I definitely do think so. Clint Sterner has that Southern accent, a little bit like a Jim Cornette, So I think that could work, man. You got the Paul Heyman vibe.
My name.
There we go, man. You get the Paul Heyman vibe, the wise man vibe, and then Clint with the Southern accent.
We get Clint a tennis racket, and it's over.
There we go.
Yeah, it's over.
You get someone with a megaphone out there like Jimmy, the mouth of the South. You're going berserk now.
It's on now. It's on. So
I think Figgy could fit that role.
There you go.
His height with his height like Jimmy Hart would be fantastic.
I like that. So I'll bring that bad boy out there with me to the draft party. As far as promoting and whatnot, Payne and Pendergast, 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. Sports Radio 610, Monday through Friday. The Odyssey app, if you can't get us on the radio, the AUDACY is the app, and you can go get all our podcasts, and you can rewind the show. The Payne and Pendergast podcast is doing really, really good numbers. I have the Utopia football podcast. It's a solo podcast I do that's Texans related. This week I got Mark Schlereth coming on it to talk Texans. So that'll be up. But I do a mailbag episode on Tuesdays, and then I have a guest on Thursdays. So that's kind of how that goes. But you can get that wherever you get your podcast, Apple or Odyssey or Spotify or whatever. Texans pregame and postgame during the season. You can find me doing that. Pregame show and postgame show. It's my favorite thing that I do. I love Texans game day. It's my favorite. And then the Houston Press. I write a post or a column each day, Monday through Friday. Most often Texans related, but sometimes, I did one on O.J. Simpson today. Sometimes you got to stray off a little bit and do some things. So anyways, so those, as far as I can think of, Harley, that's everything I got going on. That, and you can usually, if you want to find me out drinking somewhere, I'm at Lizards, which is like 2 blocks out that window right there. So, yeah.
Well, there you go, everybody. Make sure y'all are, if you're still watching, kudos to y'all if you're still watching, but make sure to like, comment, subscribe, do y'all thing down in the comment section. You know our reply. Remember, this is The Lead, where it's all Houston all the time. As always, guys, go Astros, go Rockets, go Texans. You have a blessed night.